for joining us for the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. A live transcript for this program is available on Zoom for anyone who would like to use it. Click Live Transcript at the bottom of the screen and click Show Subtitles. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Chief Operating Officer at the Holocaust Center for Humanity. The Holocaust Center, located in downtown Seattle, sits on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. I want to thank our 2022 Lunch and Learn series sponsors who helped to make these programs possible: the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture and the Francis Roth and Stanley R. Schill Foundation. If you or your company are interested in being a sponsor for our Lunch and Learn program, or even a series, let us know. Your support makes these programs possible. Today is the Chinese Lunar New Year, marking the start of the Year of the Tiger. People around the globe are celebrating today, the third Lunar New Year since the start of this pandemic. This past week, many of you likely heard about the banning of the graphic novel Maus by Art Spiegelman in a Tennessee school district. Maus is a powerful classic of Holocaust literature. School board members who were unanimously behind the decision said this decision didn't have to do with the fact that the book is about the Holocaust, but instead was about the book's appropriateness for students. If you haven't read Maus, it's a graphic novel, a comic where Jews are depicted as mice and the Nazis are depicted as cats. It's a difficult and challenging book to read, as any book about the Holocaust and genocide should be. The school board expressed concerns about nudity in a couple of the drawings depicting people in Auschwitz. There are also a couple of instances where profanity is used. Trust me, as the mom of teenagers who have access to the internet, as almost all teenagers do today, I'm certain they see and hear more in 5 minutes on YouTube and TikTok. I ask myself, this is just a tiny school in Tennessee. Why does it matter? Why is this instance bothering me so much? Because it's one more piece being chipped away, one more scratch on what's already a wound. I don't buy that banning this book is about protecting our kids. That's nonsense. It's so much larger than that. It's one more instance of trying to whitewash history, one more instance to try to protect our kids from seeing how truly cruel we can be to each other. One more instance of trying to absolve responsibility, and one more instance of silencing painful voices and painful histories. Such actions prevent us from having difficult conversations and prevent us from acknowledging what we all might be capable of if we don't work to prevent it. In just the past couple of weeks, we have seen Jews in a synagogue taken hostage. We have seen anti-Semitic graffiti in our own city of Seattle. We have heard of bomb threats sent to national Jewish organizations. And we have the banning of books that challenge us to hold ourselves accountable. We have a rise in anti-Semitic incidents across the globe in our own country and in our city. Rising anti-Semitism is accompanied by Holocaust distortion. So when I hear that the book Maus has been banned from a tiny school district in Tennessee, it is part of this larger phenomenon I'm seeing. And looked at as a whole, this makes my hair stand on end, not only as a Jewish person, but as a human being. Teachers, we are calling on you to have the tough conversations. Parents, challenge your kids to think of different perspectives on history. And to all of us, don't let these actions become normal. The tide is not irreversible, but it's up to each one of us to change it. I know I'm preaching to the choir because you all are here to learn, to ask questions, and to get involved. Thank you for taking the lead and for taking up the challenge, even when the subject matter is difficult. To help support Holocaust education and preserve the stories of the Holocaust, we are giving away one of our new graphic novels that features the story of local Holocaust survivor Steve Adler. To tell you more is my wonderful colleague, Julia Thompson, our education program manager.
Hi, thank you, Alana, so much. It's really exciting to be on the Lunch and Learn today for a brief moment. And it's great to start a new Lunch and Learn tradition with this drawing of a prize copy of our new graphic novel, More Than Any Child Should Know, a Kindertransport Story of the Holocaust. This book was written by my amazing co-worker and co-author, Paul Regelbrug, and me, and illustrated by the amazing Sean Doherty. So we're going to start giving away one copy of the book to an educator who has used a Holocaust Center resource or attended a center program since the school year began. All right, I'm going to use my magic random number generator and select our first winner today. Okay. All right, so today's winner of a copy of More Than Any Child Should Know, a Kindertransport Story of the Holocaust about local survivor Steve Adler, is going to be Catherine Espinoza from Meridian Elementary School in Kent. So that's exciting. Catherine, whether or not you're listening, you will receive a copy of this book shortly in the mail. So thanks again, Alana. At our next Lunch and Learn, we'll have another drawing and I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia, and congratulations to you, Catherine, for this for receiving this new book. It's truly an honor to have with us here today, Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. Never one to back down from a challenge, Mehnaz recognized the entrenched anti-Semitism in her own Muslim faith and set out to challenge these myths. Dr. Afridi earned her PhD in religious studies from the University of South Africa, and she currently serves as professor of religious studies and director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College. Her publications and presentations have focused on the Qur'an and human rights, Islamic literature and culture, Judaism and Islam, Holocaust and anti-Semitism. She has received numerous grants, fellowships, and awards for her outstanding work and speaks to audiences around the globe. Mehnaz is one of only a small handful of Muslim scholars teaching about the Holocaust. Her work has built bridges across communities and has challenged people of all faiths to look beyond their assumptions. Mehnaz will take questions at the end of the program. Please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to type in questions at any time. Mehnaz, thank you so much for joining us today from New York, and it's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ilana, and thank you for the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle for putting on these lunches and these programs, and thank you for all of you coming at lunchtime. That's Pacific Coast time for us here. It's a little past 3 o'clock. I'm really honored to be here. And I just want to say that Ilana's introduction was extremely sensitive. It's very important to me, very significant what's happening with education in this nation. It's very important what happened at the synagogue, which also I would like to touch on today a little bit. I wanted to start, and I'm just going to have a conversation with you. And I think this is what I love about lunches, is that you get to know someone, you get to know their work. And I just want to introduce you to some kind of my path into the Holocaust and trying to understand Judaism, but more importantly, my own fight for anti-Semitism, even harder than Islamophobia today in the United States, but also, as Ilana said, in places like Sarajevo, Berlin, and also Venice, Italy, where I just returned from teaching a class about the Jewish ghetto, which, as you may know, is the oldest ghetto in the world. So let me start with my background. I was born in Pakistan, and I was born to two lovely parents who my mother is Muslim, my father passed away, practicing Muslims, very open, very kind-hearted. And my father decided he wanted to leave the country, so we moved to Zurich, Switzerland. So my first language was Swiss German, which is interesting, and Urdu, which is my native tongue. And then we moved to London, which is where I learned English. And then from London, we moved to Luxembourg briefly. And then from Luxembourg, we moved to Geneva, Switzerland. And from Geneva, Switzerland, we went to the Middle East. From the Middle East, we came to New York. So I came here in high school. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because here I was a Muslim girl being raised as a Muslim in these different cultures with different languages and with different traditions. And I was experiencing a lot of consciousness because I was also the othered child. I was not white, I was not Christian. And I hung out basically with Jews and Hindus. We had a lovely little international group and we had a lot in common. I remember in London going to my Russian Orthodox friend for Hanukkah and her coming over for Eid, end of Ramadan. So these memories became really important to me. And then I moved to the Middle East. I was in Dubai for 3 years, where I noticed that the word Jew in Israel was being blocked off in textbooks. And I got very curious as a child. I asked my friends and they said, oh, don't worry about it. This happens all the time. So I was like, wow, this is weird. And then I moved to Scarsdale, New York, which is still predominantly Jewish American. There were a few Asian Americans and myself. And I was teased by the Jewish students because they weren't used to seeing Muslims. And we became Arabs in the eyes of all the neighbors. So in my journey, I already was doing a lot of work in my mind, not knowing where I would end up in terms of my own career, my choices, and what I've done with my life. So my background really informs who I am, and it also informs the work I do, but it also taught me something very important, that experience, openness, understanding, and challenges, even being othered or experiencing racism myself as a Muslim girl or as a brown girl, which I was called, became actually something very important in my life where I could change that and change it into positive stories. And just, anecdotally, I've been down to Scarsdale High and given them talks precisely about this. So I changed something negative into something positive. And I come to you with a lot of challenges, but I also leave you with a lot of optimism and hope, I hope, because that is the passion and compassion that I come with in terms of my work. So why the Holocaust? I think I am the only Muslim in the nation to head a Holocaust Center. When I got the job 10 years ago, there was a lot of pushback from the Jewish community, especially about a Muslim woman heading a Holocaust Center. And people asked me how I felt about that. And I thought it was challenging, but I also felt like we needed time to trust each other. There was never once a Muslim who headed a Holocaust Center, and this was time for us to do it. And my college, Manhattan College, which is a Lasallian Catholic college, was very, very important, indelible in terms of supporting me, in terms of standing by me. And I've been there 10 years, everyone, and it's been wonderful. I have a beautiful relationship with the Riverdale Jewish community, from Reform to Orthodox to Chabad community. We have worked together. I take my students there. I've worked with survivors in the area. So here is an example of what happens when you're challenged, but you take it and you say, I'm going to be honest and fair, and I'm going to set an example for people to look at. So that's a success story in terms of the Holocaust Center. The Holocaust is really important to me because when I was in school in the 90s, in college, I worked with Alan Berger. Dr. Alan Berger, who is a Holocaust scholar, I became his TA. You don't really have a choice who you work with. And I was TAing for him, and I knew about the Holocaust, but never in such depth. And to me, it was, I couldn't sleep at night. I did more and more research. I started to teach his classes. And then I did my master's in 19th-20th century Germany with Sander Gilman. And then I did a PhD in Islamic literature. So I wear many hats, but why the Holocaust? The Holocaust is the most unprecedented genocide in the world. I teach other genocides. I think Ilana mentioned that. And I teach from Rwanda to Bosnia. Right now I'm doing a lot of work on the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, and also the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. For me, the Holocaust is particularly different. It's different because it was the one genocide that went all over the world to basically murder Jews. if you look at the Bosnian genocide, which is horrible and brutal, and this is not the Olympics of genocide, I don't measure people's suffering, and we should not measure people's suffering, but we should understand how far and deep the suffering goes for each and individual genocide. But the Holocaust to me was the one event where, you know, Nazis and the Vichy government went to places like North Africa, went to Greece. They took people who were visiting relatives in Morocco out of Morocco all the way to Auschwitz and killed them. It was a technological energy and for murder and to creating these killing centers that took my soul away from myself. The idea that we could have such evil and could explain it somehow is still an impossible thing for me as a teacher and a professor for some time. So I wanted to focus on the Holocaust for that very deep, profound reason. But the second deep, profound reason I wanted to focus on the Holocaust is because I wanted to understand why there was so much distortion in my community as a Muslim, but relativization, which is an even bigger problem. And there were many instances in my life where I would go to conferences and people would say, oh, you know, it's so great that you're doing this work, but wasn't it only 2 million Jews? And that to me struck me horribly. Or the same kind of anti-Semitic tropes that came out of Europe were going into the Arab and the Middle Eastern media, into speeches, into lectures, into my community, into my family. And I know as a Muslim, and I say this with a pure, clean, and loving heart for Islam, which is the faith that I've always followed, that I've always loved, is that in Islam, it's important to speak truth and justice. There's verses in the Qur'an that talk about that, even if it's against your own people. And I know that in the Torah and in Judaism, we share these verses. And so for me, it became my mission, or maybe my hope, that through my work on the Holocaust, through my understanding of even Zionism and Israel and what all of this was, starting from, you know, anti-Semitism back when people blamed Jews for deicide in terms of Christ killing, all the way to today. My hope was to bring Jews and Muslims together and to understand each other at different times of suffering and different times of history, and also look at one another in a way that was both religiously, there were similarities, the differences in terms of home, the differences in terms of exile, the differences between nationalism, but also kind of make each other understand. So when I teach, I'm teaching right now a class, Muslims in America, and we're looking at the history of Muslims that migrated to the United States, which is actually with African slavery. There were a lot of African Muslim slaves that came to the United States in the 1800s, and we're looking at that. And I'm constantly talking about also Jewish immigration. And when I teach classes in the Holocaust, we talk about Muslims in the Holocaust and what were Muslims doing in these places. And we look at North Africa. So the impetus of my work is to take these very complicated, very rich histories and to challenge ourselves to try and understand this history, try to understand the suffering of two people at different times by different means, to maybe challenge and say, you know what, I have to listen to Muslims or Jews about how they feel. But we cannot do that in a vacuum, and we can't do that with emotion. And this is what social media has destroyed in terms of us understanding each other. And I know most people have not dedicated their lives to books, and sacred texts, and reading and teaching. But I want them to know that there is a frame and time where we can sit down and have these conversations together. I specifically look at North Africa. And the reason I look at North Africa is because there were camps in Morocco, there were camps in Algeria and in Libya and Tunisia under the Vichy government. And because the Vichy government was a colonizer in North Africa at that time, it was controlled by Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany itself directly controlled Libya for about 9 months. And that was when they were really physically there themselves in terms of North Africa. And I look at those stories because I think they're very complicated stories and not very easy for me either as a Muslim, where some Muslims became collaborators, some Muslims just became bystanders. But what I really do focus on is what was going on with the Muslim population in North Africa, the persecution of Jews, and then on top of it, the rescue stories that are so buried and hidden from all of us. How there were Muslims, Arabs, who did risk their lives, Iranian diplomats, at the Albanians basically rescued all of their Jews, the only European country that is still 70% Muslim. So these are the kinds of things that I look at, but I also think it's important to see what happened in North Africa under colonization and what happened in terms of the Holocaust. They're two completely separate things. I don't want us to think of them on the same level, but they're two things that happened to two particular times at the same time. And this moment of perception between Muslims and Jews becomes really important when we start talking about memory, when we talk about perception, and when we talk about contemporary politics and how we see one another and what we see of each other. So a lot of the times when we're talking about North Africa in my classes, I talk about how many Jewish Arabs were living, coexisting with Muslim Arabs, not always in a beautiful way. There were challenges, there were still anti-Semitic acts, but then how a lot of Jews left Arab countries, the mass exodus of them in the 1950s, especially after the state of Israel in 1948. So there is then this contemporary history that we have to understand, but not deny that Jews were forced because of the anti-Semitism to move out of Arab countries and the fear of being persecuted at the time because of the existence of Israel. So there's many, many layers to what I do, but I want to read you a couple of things that I think you might find interesting in terms of looking at the North African situation. And this is from my book. And it's a book that I wrote for both academic purposes, but also I wanted people to understand just on a lay level, like I'm talking to you throughout the book in terms of a person, a human being, talking to you about my journey. And one of the ways that I want us to understand maybe the anti-Semitism in Arab countries and also in South Asia, which is where I'm from, is that a lot of the propaganda in the 1920s, 30s, and then in the early 40s was very important to the Nazis to align with the Muslim world because they had no allies. And so I'm just going to quote something here. Politically, Arabs were not on sure ground either. This means during the Holocaust in North Africa. Too many Germans and their European partners, Arabs were only marginally less inferior than Jews. As one German officer said ominously to an Arab enjoying the comeuppance of Jews near Tunis, "Your time will come. We will finish with the Jews, then we will take care of you." If indifference meant that Arabs were primarily concerned with securing the means for their own survival, finding food, shelter, work, and so on, and could not spare the effort to act on their natural human sympathy toward their Jewish compatriot, then theirs was an understandable, even legitimate indifference, born of necessity. Indifference, I teach, is the worst thing that we can do in my classes, to be bystanders, as we know in Holocaust education. But why was there this indifference? Because at that time, the Arabs were defeated. There was a kind of fear of the colonial trying to strip them of their culture, their language, even their schools. A very famous philosopher, Jacques Derrida, who was born in Algeria, writes later on when he moves to Paris finally, of how one day he woke up and all his Arab friends were gone from his school and he was put in a Jewish school. But how the experience of Algiers shaped who he was throughout his life. And so he had this nostalgia about it, but a real experience and history about being not just a Parisian Jew, but also an Arab Jew. And I think these stories are extremely important when we start thinking about how do we see one another as Jews and Muslims. And more importantly, today in the United States, Jews are 1% of the population, and Muslims are less than 1% of the population. And when I tell my students that, they're just staggered because they think there's so many of us, right? Like we're ruling the whole country or the world, and especially Jews, because I'll ask them, what do you think is the population of Jews in the world? And they'll say 1 billion. I wish I could see your expression, but I can't. So, so there's a lot of work we need to do and education we need to do in terms of who Jews and Muslims are in the United States, who we are in the world, how many we are, and what we practice. I mean, some of my kids don't know what Hanukkah is. And here we are, we're in the Northeast of America. So I think that, and they don't know what Eid is, or they think there's, 200 million Muslims, in America. And I'm like, wait, okay. So there's a lot of very strange kind of ideas and false facts that are floating around. And this is where I come to my work on Islamophobia and antisemitism, which is very important to me. And I look at the history of both. I look at the parallels and the differences of both. And here you have the rise of anti-Semitism, as we heard from Ilana, in terms of synagogue. Banning Spiegelman is a crime in my eyes. Both my kids have read Spiegelman, and I have always been a fan of conveying this message to children through graphic novels. And to be honest with the language and the brutality, and to walk through with our children with the challenges of life, as if they don't see it on TikTok or other social media. But I think that all of these events are really, really significant today, and we need more help with Holocaust education than anything else. And I really believe that the censorship of Spiegelman, or there was recently a story of a woman making her students enact the Holocaust, which is just crazy. I mean, ridiculous. Seems to me a complete ignorance, but also this need of people to completely disavow any kind of Holocaust history. And I think one of the things that I have been working on, which is really important for me to share with you, because you should know this, is that Wendy Lauer, who is a Holocaust scholar, and I have created about 3 years ago, now 4, a consortium of higher ed, human rights, Holocaust and genocide studies, for the very fact that we need support on higher ed campuses as well. As scholars who run centers on these campuses, how do we have difficult conversations, whether it's about the Holocaust, whether it's about Zionism, whether it's about Palestine and Israel? How do we help junior faculty and junior center directors? So we're having our conference, and we've had 2 conferences. We're having our 3rd. I'm very proud. I'm having it at Manhattan College this summer. And it's a wonderful executive committee, and we're all working on genocide and human rights. So we really need that today. The second thing is that I recently created a Holocaust education curriculum with the Blue Card, which is an organization, and Peace Islands for Holocaust education in high schools. And I've been teaching 12 students, 12 senior and juniors at a high school in Brooklyn on the Holocaust. And it's been an amazing experience, because the first day, because I'm Muslim, I said, what are your stereotypes? And they gave me their stereotypes, which were Jews control everything, Jews are rich, Jews have power in Congress. And within 10 minutes, statistically, I took away those stereotypes for these kids, and they were just amazed. So there is hope, and we are constantly building different kinds of projects, and we are constantly working hard to educate. But I think one of the damages that we've done, and I think the internet is brilliant. It's one of the best tools that I could have as a scholar. It's the best thing that even students can have, but it's how we use social media, how we use our tools, technology. So this semester I have my religion 110, my first year students working on religion and media, and they're every week coming up in class with articles about how certain religions are depicted. The first week we did, how was the synagogue attack covered? And one of my students is Jewish. We have very few Jewish students in our college, but he was Jewish, and he said he was so glad to see that there was no anti-Semitism in the covers that he looked at. And I want to talk a little bit about the synagogue, because I think it's important that there should be a voice about this. It was horrible what happened at the synagogue. And I can't imagine the fear and the terror that went through every Jewish brother and sister of mine in this nation and in the world. Hence the security you see at every synagogue. Here in Europe, I see it. But why did he go to a synagogue? And that's the problem. The mind of the extremists that sees that somehow if he could have occupied a synagogue, that synagogue, that group of people, that Jews had the power to somehow do whatever he wanted. And it's not in terms of the woman who's in prison, but it's really about the act against Jews that becomes pivotal in terms of looking at the anti-Semitism. And how do we talk about that? And I know a lot of Muslim friends that are not anti-Semitic, that do wonderful work on Judaism and Jewish-Muslim relations. But I know a lot of people who are skeptical of, again, falling into these stereotypes that become very problematic. So that's one of my challenges, is how to talk to Muslim communities about this, and also try to deconstruct these ideas that have been, disseminated all over the world for many centuries and have seeped into the Arab and the Muslim world, especially in the 1930s and on. And that's a long time if you think about it now, 1930s to 2020. So this has been one of my missions, and we have successfully done a lot of work in certain countries, Muslim countries. As you know, Dubai has an exhibit on the Holocaust now, which is fabulous, because when I was a child, nobody wanted to say the word Jew. And I think that having the Abraham Accords, but not just as a symbol, but actually bringing the education to the people in these countries is the most fundamental thing that these Muslim countries can do. I just want to read you one more quote, and I'm going to show you a video, because one of the things that I hope we can talk about a little bit is the fact that I started to interview survivors in 2010 in Los Angeles when I used to live there. And I just started doing it, not knowing what was going to become of my interviews. And I did it through the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. There's a wonderful woman, Ilana Samial, who used to work there. And she put me in touch with survivors. And I was very, very fortunate to do these interviews, because it was pretty much, for a couple of them, their last interviews. But they gave me the interview because they were so intrigued that there was some Muslim woman that was interested in knowing about the Holocaust and interviewing them. And so it became a very interesting interview. I've, of course, seen lots of interviews with Holocaust survivors throughout my lifetime. But here you have the survivors asking me questions about who I am and perhaps what my belief is or what my faith is, which I found very fascinating. So I wanted to share that with you. But before I do that, I wanted to share Albert Rosa's story, because this is how I felt when I interviewed survivors. Albert Rosa was Greek. I believe he's still alive, and he lived in LA, and I didn't get permission to publish his or transcribe his interview, but I wrote this about him because he was an incredibly strong man. And when he was released from Auschwitz, he actually attacked Nazis. And like he told me, he wanted to take revenge. And he still talked in this tone to me when I was interviewing him, a wonderful man who really, really suffered deeply. So on February 27, 2010, I looked into the sky blue eyes of Albert Rosa, an 85-year-old Shoah survivor, for 3 hours as he spoke about his experience at Auschwitz-Birkenau. As I left him, he told me with his tears in his eyes that he wanted someone to write his life story. Since he had very little formal education and would not be able to express in writing his feelings on the Shoah, he asked me, how can I express in words how I felt when my sister was bludgeoned to death in front of me by a Nazi woman, or when I saw my elder brother hanging from a rope when I tried to defend him? I looked into his eyes, which had pierced me all day, and wondered how I could tell his story in words without losing the sense of the emotional, physical strength it had taken him to survive the horror of his life in the camps. He spoke of maggots crawling on his body as he was ordered to move the dead Jewish bodies, the gold he stole from the teeth of the dead, the urine he saved to nurse the wounds inflicted by a German shepherd, the plant roots that he dug out with his fingers for nourishment, the ashes he swallowed from the crematorium as he helped build Birkenau. How was I to give these events any life with mere words? These feelings of paralysis emerge as I write this testimony. How can I give the Shoah a life of its own without trespassing on politics, ethics, and the millions of victims? In some ways, I felt like abandoning this project because I feared that I could not do it justice. However, when I try to express my urge to work on this book, which is to me a simple acknowledgement of the victims and Jews of the Shoah by a Muslim, I simply could not. I became even more drawn to the project. And if we could see that video now, and I wanted you to understand how sensitive this project was for me as a Muslim woman. And when I was hired at Manhattan College as a director, I remember people writing on social media and articles that how can you trust a Muslim woman with the memory of Holocaust survivors? And I wanted to say I had the same question. So let's watch the video again. Do you know many Muslims? Have you talked to Muslims?
No, I wish I would. Because for me, it doesn't matter. You are Muslim, you are a human being. I love people. When I speak, I never ever think about that it's Muslim or Catholic or Protestant or whatever. I just see a human being. And that's the way I was raised, actually.
What is your main message to Muslims about the Holocaust?
I don't know if anyone completely understand what happened there. You know, I mean, what happened, that's true. Why that did happen and the whole world was looking at and didn't do anything, that's one thing I don't understand. But one thing I understand, that we should all like each other, talk to each other, and try to understand each other.
Talking to you, I forget that, you know, you are Muslim today?
Yes.
Okay, I totally forget that, but
that's good. We shouldn't look
yeah,
at our...
I know.
That's
but
precisely the point of this
I know,
practice.
I realize that the question I have for the Muslims, do you really believe that any paper we sign is going to have an effect on the children that you teach to kill? That's the question I want to ask.
Okay, perfect question. The gas chambers especially are seen by a lot of people as a fabrication. As difficult as it is for me to ask you this, could you perhaps shed light on that from your perspective?
Well, you know, only a totally ignorant human being would say today that it didn't happen. I don't have the right to forgive. It's not my job to forgive. God is the only one that can forgive. I only have to remember and be aware all the time of what can happen. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I try to do my job.
Okay.
Like you are doing yours. Have you been threatened?
Have I been threatened? Yes.
I'm sure.
As a Muslim, yes. Both in my community and outside of my community.
I'm sure.
So, I mean, I also spend a lot of time, Renee, going to Jewish temples
Mm-hmm.
and showing similarities of justice between Judaism and Islam.
I don't care what color, what creed, what you do in life, as long as you're a decent person. That's enough for me. Now, let me ask you a question. Are you a religious Muslim?
I believe, yes.
You believe. You believe you believe there's somebody upstairs who's going to guide your life, who's going to make you a better person.
I don't think that person is going to make me a better person, but I think there's something there that is not guiding me.
Then you go through your life with rules, the rules that the Muslims are giving you. Is that what it is? I'm asking you. I'm not judging you. I'm asking you a question.
No, I don't go with the rules that
because a lot of people do that, right, including the Jewish religion.
If a Muslim is watching, what do you want to say to them?
I say, get an education. Learn about life. Don't be in your little sphere only, and just don't see anybody else but yourself. And if you do that, if you get educated, maybe we'll have a better chance in this world.
So there's stories that were told during Muhammad's life in the 6th century. Jihad means struggle.
Okay.
So jihad has several connotations. One is holy war. Not direct translation, but the result is holy war, which means if someone comes to your house and forces you and your family out or kills you, you have the right to defend yourself with struggling against them through jihad. However, it doesn't mean that you kill them. The Holocaust is unique, right? Holocaust was not just in Germany, it was in Poland, it was in Czech, it was in Italy, it was all over, it was in Tunisia. So the whole point of the Holocaust was to exterminate Jews off the face of the earth. I don't care if someone wants to sit there and deny it, they can do it till they're blue in the face.
Such a powerful film. Thank you for sharing those interviews.
You're welcome. It was very powerful for me, Alana, to do that work. I mean, it was it was hard because I had just my daughter had just been born, and I was kind of leaving her with my husband, and my friend was my cameraman, and we were going all over LA in different places to interview survivors. And then when I moved to New York, I befriended a lot of survivors who sadly passed on. But, you know, just had them over for dinner, and they were very open, and some were very questioning about Islam, you know, and how they saw Islam through the lens of the media. They saw Islam as this extremist religion, but they were willing to listen, right? Willing to engage and talk about how it's, you know, how Muslims live, or to know my family, or to come over, or to know my work. So it's been such a powerful experience for me. And that's why I call it the document in my book when I transcribe it, because this is it. When people want evidence, I say, you know, here's the document. Read it for yourself. These are the witnesses.
Mehnaz, I feel like this must be such difficult work because you're getting pushback from your own Muslim community and also from the Jewish community.
Yeah, I mean, it's better. I mean, better in the sense that I think the Muslim community kind of leaves me alone, and I'm happy that when my book came out, there was no pushback or anger because, you know, to be honest, Alana, I'm Muslim. I'm not against Islam. I'm not against the Islamic principles. I'm definitely against the extremists. I mean, they ruined so much for us Muslims. They've killed more Muslims than anybody else. Even in, you know, in Pakistan, where my mother lives, it's hard because you don't know when the extremists will rise up. So we are also in that terror and that fear of the extremists. So I think that's, and I'm not angry about anything. And I think that makes a difference, because I do believe that there is compassion and passion from all kinds of people, not just Jews and Muslims, but many different kinds of people. And I think we just need to we have to work in that way and focus our energy in that. And sometimes it's hard, and I understand that.
Mehnaz, there's a question here from Marcy, and she writes, this is a wonderful presentation. I'm hearing an echo. I don't know if maybe that's on your end, if it's coming through twice, but stop me if anyone else is hearing it. She asked, can you please say more about Besa? I understand that it is a code of honor, compassion, and promise that was the foundation of Albanian Muslims to protect and save Jews during the Holocaust. What is its basis? Why was or is Besa so core to the identity of the Muslims of Albania?
Okay, can you hear me okay? Am I echoing as well? Okay.
No, I can hear you great.
Okay, so Besa is a very interesting story. Besa is based on the promise. It's a cultural concept and tradition in Albania. It's also, Besa is connected to the idea that, you know, all people are brothers and sisters, especially Jews and Christians in terms of the Albanian faith, but also the Islamic faith. And I think the stories, if you read the stories about Besa, I had the exhibit come to Manhattan College, and I also have a display in an exhibit I created in 2019 on a Holocaust survivor, but I also have a display on rescue stories because I want my kids to leave with an optimistic point of view, is that people, you know, salvaged Torahs, and they kept, you know, Hanukkah candles and, you know, shawls, and kept them for the Jews to return to. So Besa is a concept that's very particularly Albanian. And I also want to mention that Albania is 70% Muslim and 30% Christian. And there were Christians too that rescued, but the majority of them were Muslim, and they used Islamic principles to talk about that. Albania opened its borders to Jews. So there were more Jews in Albania after World War II than there were before. They changed the names of these families to Muslim names. They hid them in their homes. It's an incredible story, and it's an incredible documentary. And Norman Gershom also came to our college, who did the photography, and unfortunately he passed away about 3 years ago.
Thank you. Mehnaz, I'm sure this won't surprise you, but we have a number of questions that are being asked about how to grapple with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how you approach that subject and how this might affect your work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know. I mean, this is it's a very big question. So, I openly accept the state of Israel. I believe that Jews need a home. That's the first step of dialogue, and I think we need to have that dialogue. I think that once we are educated and understand why the state of Israel is important to Jews, it's really, really important that we do that and educate people in terms of that, not just about, you know, the fact that Jews didn't have homeland, but the history of Judaism. So I teach about it in terms of Israel is a state that needs to stay and be viable. And I also talk about Palestinian suffering and talking about how perhaps we can start thinking about how Palestinians themselves feel dispossessed. The question I want to ask the audience who's asking this question is that, can we not be pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian at the same time? To me, that is extremely important, because what we're saying is that we're pre-human. We want that Israelis and Palestinians can coexist and have peace and have their own land. I am not Palestinian, nor am I Israeli, but I care about both people. And of course, doing Jewish-Muslim relations in America, there's no way you can talk about Israel or Palestine. In the new book that I'm working on, it's called The Wounded Muslim. And the reason it's called The Wounded Muslim is because I want people to realize that how much genocide has gone on in the Muslim world. And we never talk about genocide in the Muslim world. And one of the chapters is dedicated to Palestinians, not about genocide because it's about war, but also dispossession, right? And to give it nuance where I'm not blaming Israel or Jews, but talking about a situation that's important to talk about. If you can have a dialogue about Palestine and Israel with your Muslim friend or your Jewish friend, I think that's really important. I also am on the board of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, and they are now working on Palestine and Israel. They're very difficult questions because we all have a different kind of political understanding of the situation. It's difficult because, you know, it's almost like, okay, all Muslims are with Palestine and all Jews are with Israelis, and it becomes a sort of stark black and white reality. And we have to undo that. It's very, very challenging, very difficult. When I am asked to make a statement about Gaza or Israel, I do make a statement, but it's about peace. So, you know, I told my daughter the other day, she's a teenager now. She went to a multicultural club, and there was a girl in this club that was racist, basically. And she said, "Mama, why would you come to the multicultural club?" And then we started talking about race, and I said to her, I said, "You know, I have so many of these instances." And she goes, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "I just think peace." And it's almost like you can really do something with that. If you say, "I really do believe in peace," not just that I want peace for the world, but I humanly believe in peace with you and with you, then you are going to sustain the line. But if you get swayed with the emotions, you get swayed by the political parties, you won't survive. That's kind of what I see the
world. Yeah, you see the world differently when you see it as made up of individuals instead of just politics.
Or nations, yeah.
Or nations. So, Mehnaz, are there Jewish scholars and professors who are teaching about anti-Muslim attitudes in the same way or with the same passion and sensitivity with which you are teaching about anti-Semitism?
I mean, there are. I mean, Ivan Kalmar and I did a program together. He does work on Orientalism and Jews and Muslims. There are some historians that do that work, but I think there are few that are looking at not. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish scholars that are talking about Islamophobia, but there are few that are talking about suffering of Muslims under colonization, which I think is a really important time period to talk about. If you think about the 52 countries that are Muslim today, every single one of them was colonized by a European country for many years. I come from a country which was colonized for 238 years. So my own mother went to Catholic school because she didn't have a choice because of the missionaries there. So there's a lot of interesting ways of thinking about Muslim identity today. And I think that the Muslim world is very fractured and is still trying to ask that very challenging question, who are we? Are we a British parliamentary system? Are we going to be like the French, a socially democratic system? Are we Muslim? Are we theocracy? Or are we secular? Right? I mean, Pakistan is a pretty liberal country, but we keep moving back and forth about religion. You know, it's like, yes, we want religion, but we don't want to be theocratic, right? So it's this tug and pull that is still going on that I think the Muslim is trying to work out, Muslim countries, Muslim communities in different ways, right? So like Iran is very different from Pakistan. Pakistan is very different from, say, Indonesia. And that's another thing. It's so diverse in the Muslim world. I mean, we're dealing with 1.6 billion people. And this extremism is a product of desperate means and measures to carve out an authentic fantasy that somehow this religious identity that ISIS and Taliban and Al-Qaeda are all vowing about is that there's some fantasy that there's something pure about being this kind of extreme Muslim. It's like looking for a paradigm. So it's really, I mean, it's a really longer but interesting conversation. And it's problematic because, you know, people are suffering, women are suffering, and men are suffering. So, I mean, Syria is a mess, right? I think it's a genocide because it's one ethnicity killing another ethnicity. But if you read about it, and I'm trying to do a lot of research on it, you get confused and lost about which party is against what. But the majority of victims are Muslims, same in Iraq and same in Afghanistan. And that's something I just want us to remember, that the victims of Muslim extremism are mainly Muslims.
Thank you. So one last question here. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on now and the new book that you're working on, and where people can find your existing book?
Okay, my existing book, Shoah Through Muslim Eyes, you can buy it on Amazon. And I hope, I mean, it's very accessible. I'm also writing my next book to be very accessible. I'm actually asking the following question in this book. And the question is, how do Muslims heal after trauma? Meaning after war or genocide. It's a question that has crept up in my own work on the Holocaust, post-Holocaust thinking. How do Muslims heal? Do they just look for religion? What kinds of ways do they experience trauma, and what happens to them? If you look at a lot of, I mean, I will be including this in the book, is interviews with Uyghur Muslims that have been persecuted and have escaped, Rohingya Muslims. It's interesting, but you see a pattern of the only reason they survived was God, right? So there's this, like, does Islam itself offer this healing? Or is it because we're under, when anyone, Muslim or not, is under genocide and war, do we look for this metaphysical sort of comfort, this God or our God, to feel some kind of healing? So that's the question I'm asking. It hasn't been really asked in my field, so I'm kind of alone out there right now, but we'll see what happens.
I can't wait to see it. In closing, I want to read you one comment that just came in through the chat. And this person writes, "You are a wonderful, honest thinker, and for me, you are doing holy work. Thank you."
Oh, that's so sweet.
Mehnaz, thank you so much for being part of this program today. I'm so inspired by the work you are doing, and just thank you for creating these bridges for us.
You're my holy warrior with me, bringing me here today. Thank you so much.
Well,
thank you.
I want to thank everyone for joining today's program. This program was recorded, and you'll be able to find it on our website starting tomorrow. Programs like these are possible because of the generous support of our donors. So if you found today's program interesting, please consider making a donation to help support more programs like this one. And you can find a link on our website. Please join us for our next Lunch and Learn program on Tuesday, February 15th, entitled Leo's Journey in My Father's Words. And that is with Richard Lowy. Richard's father, Leo, survived the Holocaust, Auschwitz, and the experiments of Mengele, and he'll tell us his father's story. I want to give a special thank you to Richard Green, our Museum and Technology Director, who is running the technical side of this program. Also, a huge thank you to our CEO, Dee Simon, and to our entire team, Lori Werschel-Cohen, Paul Regelbrug, Julia Thompson, who you saw earlier, Morgan Romero, Amanda Davis, Devonshire Lockie, Katie Lawrence, and Allie Lapps. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch and Learn program on February 15th. This concludes our program for today.